somebody asked me a question. What is the role of an arborist? And it got me to thinking. Oh, I know what my role is, what I do as an arborist, but there are many different types of arborists. There are city arborists. And what is the role of a city arborist? Primarily, their job is, I hate to say it, but it's the tree police. They're in charge of making sure that planning projects are done right in relationship to tree roots and not over pruning trees for construction projects. But sadly, a lot of developers and contractors have a lot of ways of getting around it, and ultimately the projects get passed and the trees get damaged regardless. So what other kind of arborists are there? Well, the power company is hiring a lot of arborists right now to go out and inspect trees that are adjacent to power lines. They're hazardous, and they get them taken care of. So that's a big part of it. So there's a safety role. Let's see, there's arborists who are educators. I call myself an educator. I mean, I'm a practicing arborist. I'm not working on the trees, but I like to pass on what I have learned, and through this YouTube channel, I'm trying really hard to be an educator. There's academia. There's college professors who are arborists. There's scientists. And there are a lot of scientists that are studying all the tree diseases and all the incidents that are happening around the world, with trees, everything from insect problems to fungal problems to different diseases. So that's another arborist. And then there's the climbing arborist. I'm a climbing arborist. I work in the trees, which is interesting because you would think that anyone who calls themselves an arborist would actually work in the trees. But a lot of arborists, they look at trees and they talk about trees, but they don't actually get up into them. So I'm a climbing arborist, and that means that I understand trees from the perspective of being up inside of the tree and knowing the strengths and weaknesses firsthand. And if that's what you are, if you're a climbing arborist, you're probably giving me a thumbs up right now and say, I get it, I know what you're talking about. There's also a level of arborist that is kind of sadly a destructive arborist, and because of the nature of the work they do, they may be a certified arborist, but all they have to do are removals. So they might be in an area that every call that they get, the greater majority of them are cutting down trees for one reason or another. And sadly for me, that kind of takes away from the ideology of what an arborist is. Because really you don't have to be qualified to be an arborist to remove trees. You have to be qualified to understand how to use a chainsaw, how to work safely, and how to be a practicing tree worker. But to understand why you're pruning a tree or why you're taking care of a tree, that's a whole nother level. So these are just a few of my thoughts on what it takes to be an arborist. But the role of an arborist, I think, really ought to be how to preserve trees, how to take care of trees, how to make good decisions. And it's not always going to be to save the tree, but are going to be wise decisions on public safety. As a tree professional, I think it's important to understand how trees work. There's a very interesting picture here. I found this, somebody sent it to me, of a tree that was cut down, but it was grafted, limb grafted. They're the same species. I believe that's a beech. And the tree survived without a root system. Now, where I live, there's a lot of historical heritage oak trees. This happens to be a Quercus agrifolia. And I'm going to start off with a big negative. I drove by and I saw this heritage tree that was cut. This flush cut really shocked me. There is no retention of the branch bark collar or branch bark ridge. Furthermore, the climber that got a hold of this tree went and cut all the suckers off aggressively with a chainsaw, exposing large areas of trunk to the wounds, to the openness, to the decay, to the future demise of this tree. So the decisions that this individual tree worker made may have felt aesthetically correct, but he had no idea what he was doing. He had no idea why he was making these decisions. Now I want to show you a few wounds on oak trees. Here's a very old one, and you can see what this old wound has developed into. Here's a sad story. This tree had its main bottom trunk cut to the ground, and you can see the active cambium tissue, but the decay is causing this tree to become completely hollow. Here's a cut where the arborist was just, or the tree worker was just too fast, and it was a horrible stub cut, but he slipped with a chainsaw. I see that so often. I want to talk a little bit today about valley oaks, Quercus lobata. It's a big, beautiful, wide-spreading tree that's very common in our area. They're amazing to climb, but they are a challenge. So we had one yesterday that had significant old stubs that were hanging off of it that were rotting. And it's important to understand the characteristics of the type of tree that you're working in. So this particular tree, the valley oak, when stubs become rotted, they become very fragile and they can fall out. Here's where there was an old rip. You can tell that a long time ago, a big section of this tree ripped and it continued to rot. Now there's a lot of healthy tissue trying to keep this going, but I discovered that when I was up in the tree, and I realized there is just way too much weight on this defect. So there's a couple of uprights, and there's a large limb. This is all going right over the road. So I made a judgment call to lighten this up, get some end weight off, get enough weight off to make the tree safer. And that limb will never be perfectly safe, but if you can reduce enough of the end weight, then you can certainly make it safer. And we had a lot of obstacles, and there was a lot of traffic here. This was at the entrance to a cemetery in Saratoga. So here's some of the cuts that I was making when I got up there. You can see there's some healthy tissue and there's some decayed tissue. This is a stub cut that was made a long time ago, and it's sticking out a little bit. So it's kind of retaining the branch bark collar, but out a little ways. Here's one that you can see the active tissue, but there's a lot of rot. Should I cut it back closer? I don't think so. It's better just to leave that alone. This is about as ideal a cut as I could find. Here's one you can see there's still a lot of decay, and so that tells you that the stubs were rotting and working their way into the center of the tree. A little bit less on this one. Interesting to look at some of the old wounds and how they're trying to encapsulate this wound. The active cambium tissue, you want to retain that. You don't want to cut that all and start all over again, because it's kind of a race. It's trying to enclose that wound. Look at all the decay on this one. That was about as good a cut as I could possibly make, considering the amount of dieback on the tree. There's a fresh one. There wasn't any decay in that. That was kind of nice to see. And the part that I cut off was completely and totally dead, but I got back to the trunk, so I guess I caught it in time. This one might be a little bit too close. Sometimes it's really hard to read that branch collar. There's an old cut. You can see what's happened. It's decayed and it's hollowed out. That was evidence of a flush cut. And it's also important to recognize that certain types of trees decay more excessively than others. There's an old cut and somebody left a stub and it's trying to absorb the wound, but you can see there's a little bit of decay. Some insects have gotten in there. I tell people, I say we want to make the smallest diameter wound without leaving a stub. This is a little bit of a stub. I would have cut that back another 3 inches or so, but you can see how it's reacting. Here's an interesting piece here where this wound this is an old cut, it's hollowing out. So when you inspect a tree, you have to look at all the possibilities, all the weaknesses. And there was a lot of weight on this limb past this wound, and it went out there quite a ways. So weight reduction may or may not be necessary based upon the discoveries that you make. So I hope that was helpful. Thanks so much for watching. I appreciate all the comments. I appreciate everything that you do to help my channel. And stay healthy out there.